Howdy, historians. Welcome to World War II. For all you out there that are, kind of like history buffs, or you had some interest in history, when you were younger or before you got to high school, it seems like World War II is definitely one of those topics that always fascinates people. It definitely fascinated a young Mr. Montgomery as I started to learn more about history. I remember going to the Brookfield Public Library and checking out books about the fighter planes and bombers of World War II. I loved seeing the different parts of the planes, and then later learning about Hitler and the rise of the Nazis in Germany, and then learning my family's history, how both my grandfathers served in World War II, and how my grandma was a army nurse during World War II, and kind of support role that my other grandma played in World War II, and it's just fascinating on so many different levels. So it seems like everyone definitely has some interest in it, and at least some baseline understanding. Now, admittedly, for APUS, we don't go into a ton of detail about it, and the big areas of focus, are how the U.S. is responding to what's going on in Europe. So if you're looking for, a lot of information about the rise of the Nazis in Germany, or the fighting of the war in the European theater or the Pacific theater, it's not really the focus for APUS history. Instead, for APUS history, it's really about how did the United States try to stay out of the war for as long as we could? What eventually got us into the war? And then how did we mobilize? How did we help? What, wartime conferences were we involved in? Things like that. So fascinating, fascinating stuff. If you love history, keep finding ways to learn about it. There's so many good movies, documentaries, books. It's just an endless amount of information. So a little intro here while we're on our title page. We're really going to kind of start talking about World War II in like the mid 1930s. Okay, so if we use the year 1933, 1933 is when the Nazi Party came to power in Germany under Adolf Hitler with promises to reassert German nationalism and militarism. That's why we're going to use 1933 as the year, because that's the year when Germany goes under Nazi Party control under the leadership of Adolf Hitler. So in 1933, very few people around the world believed that the Treaty of Versailles would hold the peace for very long. The Nazi Party was on the rise in Germany. Their nationalism and militarism freaked a lot of people out. Japan in the Pacific theater is threatening China and becoming more militaristic. And there's a lot of just militarism and nationalism around the globe. Militarism, the building of the army and the glorification of the army. Nationalism, the glorification of your nation to an extreme extent, right? We're kind of bordering on like Djangoism. It's not patriotism. It's not good old, hey, I'm proud of my country. Nationalism and Djangoism is extreme patriotism that typically has some type of militaristic backing, where like you feel you're so powerful in such a great country, you want to go off and show your greatness by force. So there's tensions rising around the world. Now in the US, of course, our concerns are overshadowed by the Great Depression because we're in the depths of it. And most Americans believed that if war was going to break out, we wouldn't send troops and we would stay out, and that we would be more isolationist. And even that is something that had happened. There was some Japanese aggression in China in September of 1931. Herbert Hoover didn't really do anything because we were under more of an isolationist policy. When FDR came to power and started to see things going on, he also really just kept an isolationist policy so we could focus on what was going on in the Great Depression and try to fix what ailed us back home before we tried to, fix anything that was going on around the world. So 1933 is kind of the year, right, when Hitler and the Nazi Party starts to take over in Germany, and that will eventually lead us to all of these events that make up World War II. So the first thing we want to look at, we just did a little intro, is the rise of fascism and militarism. So fascism is really based on the ideas of totalitarianism. All right. Now, the worldwide depression, before I get to a definition of totalitarianism here, all right, the worldwide depression had an alarmingly negative effect in Europe. All right. This depression, the Great Depression, was not just something that was seen in the United States. It was something that was truly global. All right, and there was a lot of resentment. There was a lot of tension from the Depression. People are always looking for a scapegoat. Then you add in the resentment and the tension from post World War I with those economic hardships, and we started to see the rise of dictators in Europe and the rise of dictators that were using totalitarianism. All right, so we'll see a couple of the specific groups here in a minute. So these totalitarian governments start to spring up in Europe after World War I in the 1920s and the 1930s. So in a totalitarian system, when you're using totalitarianism, the governments are going to be controlled by a single party and typically a single leader, like the Nazi Party being controlled by Adolf Hitler, all right, or Benito Mussolini taking control in Italy. They are going to typically take total power. All right, so it's going to be a single party dictatorship that exerts control over every aspect of life. They're going to control the economy, society, politics, and the cultural lives of their citizens. You're typically going to have a strong, charismatic leader, state control again of the economy. There's typically the use of terror to enforce the will of the state. All of these totalitarian rulers have secret police. It was the brown shirts in Italy. It was the SS for Hitler. Media and propaganda are used to indoctrinate citizens. Schools and youth organizations like the Hitler Youth are there to spread the ideology to children, and you have very strict censorship. Artists, intellectuals, political rivals, dissenting opinions, all censored. No dissent is allowed. No political rivals are allowed. In a totalitarian system, you totally take control of everything, right? You're taking control of religion, the economy, education, family, media, everything. The state, the government has complete control over every aspect of society, and there's typically one person who is in charge of this. All right? So we'll see this in Italy. We'll see this in Russia / the Soviet Union and Germany. Japan's a little bit different system. Their prime minister is going to basically take control from the emperor, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So those are some of the characteristics of totalitarianism. Now, in Italy, they're under the leadership of Benito Mussolini. He and his fascist party came to power in 1922. Now, although Italy was on the winning side of World War I, they still faced a lot of post-war problems. They were not free from the economic depression that was gripping the world. It was hard for people to find jobs, especially veterans of World War I, and they were very frustrated by that. And eventually there was a big communist movement that was growing, and the government seemed weak. The government seemed inept to deal with the problems that was facing the country. The Italians at this point basically had a monarchy, and in 1922, the Italian king Victor Emmanuel II asked Benito Mussolini to create a government and kind of try to make everything right in Italy again. So he came in, he trumpeted nationalism, and he promised to make Italy great again. He had his secret police of the brown shirts. His followers were known as the black shirts, and they eventually called him Il Duce, I-L-D-U-C-E, Il Duce, the leader. He took control. He outlawed all political parties, took control of the army, created a secret police, took over the press, organized youth groups to indoctrinate the youth, suppressed strikes, suppressed critics, ultra powerful. His grip was very strong on Italy. I mean, honestly, his grip over Italy was probably more powerful than Hitler's over Germany or Stalin's over the Soviet Union. That's how much power this guy had, because he organized a big group of people, nationalists, World War I vets, those who were afraid of the spread of communism, those who wanted to create jobs, and then just completely outlawed any dissent and used his fascist ideology. And in fascism, you're always going to see fascism and totalitarianism go hand in hand. Fascism is the idea that people should glorify their nation and their race through an aggressive show of force. So again, fascism, the idea that people should glorify their nation and their race through an aggressive show of force. This became the predominant ideology in European dictatorships in Europe during the 1930s. So, sometimes that show of force seems like it'll be like, we're just going to build up our military just to show everyone we can do it. Well, typically when you build it up, you eventually want to use it, right? And then other times it's, no, we're going to go out and we're going to conquer areas to show everybody that we're great, and that we are powerful. And that's very appealing during something like a depression, when there's a lot of pent up frustration, and there's a lot of hostility and a lot of tension, and people are looking for a scapegoat for all that tension and hostility. Well, what's the scapegoat? Go out and conquer some other people to show off your strength. So even though things may not be going perfect, you're better than these other areas that you're conquering. And then when you conquer these areas, you're going to build up your mobilization, your military machine. So it's going to revitalize your economy in a way. So that's what Italy's going to do. That's also how Hitler rises to power in Germany. So in the 1920s, the German Nazi Party rose to power. Honestly, Germany was just in deplorable economic conditions after the Treaty of Versailles and after World War I. The Treaty of Versailles and the way that it punished Germany made it possible for the Nazi power to rise to power. I can't talk today. Nazi party to rise to power, excuse me. So Hitler came in, he used bullying tactics against the Jews and a fascist ideology to win support of the disgruntled, unemployed German population. There was a depression. He used that to seize upon anti-Semitic hatred, and in 1933, he took complete control of the German legislature. The Weimar Republic, the democracy that had been created in Germany after World War I, was just not very effective. Then the Depression comes in. It leads to the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party. The Depression actually grew even worse in the 1930s. There was runaway inflation. Germany tried to just print money to pay off its debt, which made their money absolutely worthless. And these are some of the things that led the Germans to turn to Hitler. And he came in with the Nazi Party, took control, hardcore anti-Semitic, outlined his plan for Germany. And again, it's going to be based off these fascist totalitarian ideas. They're going to show the strength of the Aryan race. They're going to scapegoat the Jewish people, and they're going to bring Germany back to prosperity. Right, so January 1933, the president of Germany appoints Hitler to chancellor, and then he slowly takes control of Germany. And by 1935, he basically has unchecked power. And Hitler was the total center of their totalitarian regime. He created a secret police, the SS, to control, to crush all of the opposition to him. He controlled the press. He controlled the educational systems. He controlled every aspect of their society, economy, and political system, and really assumed a godlike aura over the people of Germany, and instituted, a very strict regime. But he also instituted massive public works programs that got people to work and increased people's faith in his government. Now, meanwhile, freedom was disappearing. Jewish persecution was increasing, but people were getting back to work and they were feeling proud to be German again, and they kind of turned a blind eye to some of the other things that were going on in the name of economic progress. More on, obviously, all these guys to come. This is just a little bit about their rise. Now, in Japan, it's more a group of people. It's the nationalists that are going to come to power in the 1920s and the 1930s. You have Hideki Tojo. Hideki Tojo is the prime minister and supreme military commander. He's really the guy in charge of Japan during World War II. The emperor is Hirohito. He was kind of a puppet emperor. Tojo is really the guy in control. And again, it's poor economic conditions that are used to persuade the Japanese emperor and the Japanese people that the best way to assure Japanese economic success is to build an empire. Their idea is they're going to invade China, they're going to invade Southeast Asia, they're going to take their natural resources, and then that is going to lead Japan to this economic resurgence. So Japan in the 1930s goes into this Great Depression like everybody else. The civil leaders were discredited because they couldn't solve these problems. The military leaders like Tojo start to push forward and take control. And Japan never quite becomes a totalitarian state because there's still a constitutional monarchy in place with the emperor, but the nationalists and the military leaders took control, and they started to expand out in 1931 when they started to take over major parts of China. So nationalism, fascism, totalitarianism is on the rise. And we're seeing these different groups come to power in Europe and in the Pacific that are going to start this war. So hop over to the next video. I want to talk about the preludes to the war, kind of like the early causes and some of the early hostilities of World War II, and then how the U.S. tries to stay neutral. So go over to World War II Part 2 for the next part of the story.